Mark, you look like you were about to.
Yeah, it was a tell.
As a European, as a
European, I am a European, actually.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, Irish citizen. Yeah, so there you go.
Welcome.
Speaking as a European, I like to say the following.
Mark Carney's going to Europe. He says within the next couple of days. Can't tell you when the election is coming. We got lots to talk about today, so join me. I'll be right back. We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. And we're going to be showing Mark Carney's remarks to reporters yesterday, as well as Pierre Polyev's response, which I think was very reasonable, very leveled, very rational. But what's going on here? What is Mark Carney doing? Is there some kind of game going on? Don't tell me the Liberals are playing games. Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. And I can tell you this, we've all seen this game planned before. I feel badly for Pierre Poleyev this morning. I felt badly for him yesterday at the news conference because it wasn't supposed to happen this way. The Liberals were not supposed to elect a new leader before the next election. Pierre Poilievre was 26 points ahead of the Liberals under Justin Trudeau. We should have already had an election against Justin Trudeau. But he's gone on to his globalist rewards, or will soon be going on to his globalist rewards, and he's left Mark Carney behind to look after the Trudeau agenda. Yeah, you look at that cabinet, some significant changes, but it's very much a Trudeau cabinet. And as Pierre Poilievre points out in the clip I'm going to show you, we've got some of the same players there. Marco Mendicino as the chief of staff. We've got Gerald Butts is again going to be working for Mark Carney as he did for Justin Trudeau. But I'll tell you this, Mark Carney did what he needed to do yesterday, and that's to deceive Canadians. Most Canadians are going to be very impressed with Mark Carney's performance yesterday and how he operated on day one as PM. Now you, dear viewers, I know you're not impressed. You know what was happening. You're not dumb enough to fall for this. But many voters are going to say, wow, look at that. He canceled the carbon tax on day one. Just one day. That's leadership. He reduced the size of cabinet by almost a half. Now that's decisive leadership. But make note, note bien, NB, as your professors or teachers are going to point it out to you. He's only reducing the carbon tax. It was an order in council. He can't eliminate it. He can reduce it to zero. He needs a parliamentary vote to actually eliminate the carbon tax. And he's not prepared to do that. He's not going to bring Parliament back, is he? And he's not saying when there's going to be an election. I'll get to that in a minute. But I think Mark Carney would be quite happy to run the government by orders in council and to tell you that he's doing things he's not really doing. Now, as Pierre Poilievre points out in the clip I'm about to show you, Mark Carney has more in store for you. Yes, he's reduced the personal carbon tax to zero. You're going to see the gas prices go down, but he's going to impose a carbon tax on corporations, on industries, on businesses, and they'll pass it right back to you. He's going to impose a carbon tariff, a frightening concept that's going to drive businesses out of the country. See how that affects the bottom line in this country. And where is he going? His first opportunity probably on St. Patrick's Day, because he is Mark Carney. He's going to go to Europe and meet with his globalist friends and keep the war in Ukraine going and talk about how he can tank the US dollar with his European Union buddies. As he said in the beginning clip, he's a European. Canada has always been his first or his second or third thought. Europe is first. Actually, no, globalism is first, followed second by China. Carney was very coy about when he's going, about when he is actually going to call the next election. Oh, before November. Well, that's nice. At least we'll get an election before November. But I still say he will call one a lot sooner than November because the bloom will soon fall from the flower of Mark Carney. And day one, as good as it's going to get for Mark Carney. This globalist has a preponderance of baggage that he needs to talk about, he needs to answer, and journalists need to start examining. That's got to happen soon. Before I get to some clips here, I encourage you again. To please have a look at our Substack article on Mark Carney. This is a man who is dedicated to replacing the US dollar with the Yuan, the Chinese currency, or what he calls a synthetic hegemonic currency. Only Mark Carney could come up with a term like that. But that's what he's up to. We have been talking about this all for the last week, actually all week. A lot of people have said it can't be true. That can't be what Mark Carney is all about. He seems like such a reasonable man. Well, Mark Carney is a reasonable man for a globalist, but he's focused entirely on advancing a globalist agenda. This is what Mark Carney is all about. And here's Mark Carney on the US dollar. Mark Carney, March 2024. It is good that the Chinese currency has become the global reserve currency. He said that at the China Development Forum. Mark Carney, August 2019. Carney urged central banks to collaborate in replacing the US dollar by looking at China's currency or a new synthetic hegemonic currency. There it is. Through a network of central banking digital currencies that would decrease the US dollar's domineering influence on trade worldwide. He said that at the Jackson Hole, Wyoming Economic Summit. Now you're saying, a lot of people are telling me, this can't be true. This can't be what Mark Carney's about. He said, he was governor of the Bank of England, governor of the Bank of Canada. He doesn't want to destroy the US dollar. Oh, yeah, he does. Yes, he does. And that is entirely what Mark Carney is about. Let me read. It is good that the Chinese currency has become the global reserve currency. He pointed out that to enhance the renminbi's, this is the Chinese digital currency, it's called a renminbi, status as a reserve currency, and expanding its international use will be one of the most important factors. There's more. This is Mark Carney talking. In his speech, Carney expressed concerns about the booming United States economy. Now that the United States economy is doing better than most, pushing the dollar higher, smaller countries are suffering more than they should. Trump's tariff on imports from China and elsewhere are adding to the dollar's strength as well, making matters even worse. Carney went on to say, and the most likely candidate for true reserve currency status, that renminbi has a long way to go before it is ready to assume the mantle. The initial building blocks are there. Already, China is the world's leading trading nation, overtaking the US at the start of the decade. And the renminbi is now more common than sterling oil future benchmarks, despite having no share in the market prior to 2018. These are Mark Carney's own words. This is Mark Carney's plan. So while he tells you he has great respect for the United States and its economy, that's what he's really up to. Let's listen to what Mark Carney had to say yesterday.
Prime Minister Carney, I'm Jillian Piper with Global News. I understand that your assets have been put into a blind trust. I wanted to ask you, what is the value of the assets and where did they come from? How can Canadians know that there's no conflict of interest if they don't know where the assets come from?
That's an odd question, or odd way of framing it. The assets are in a blind trust. So
why is that an odd question to ask him, where's the money? He's been asked repeatedly about where he is getting his money, why he moved his company to the United States, why his company invested in fossil fuels, why his company invested in pipelines around the world. It's a legitimate question.
And can I point out that for those who don't follow this, I have 6 months to put, or 120 days to put the assets in a blind trust. I already have put the assets in a blind trust. And once assets are in a blind trust, you don't know that. By definition, you don't know the assets because the trustees take over the responsibility. I would like to reassure you that the assets that I have were earned through employment, employment income, employment as a public servant, and employment in the private sector. And I would note as well that employment in the private sector is something that the Leader of the Opposition has never experienced. And I would point as well that complying or meeting standards expected of a leader of a party, let alone a prime minister, is something that the Leader of Opposition has not respected either.
Talk about, can you say, distraction? The question was about his finances because it's very murky. And if you go into our deep dive about Mark Carney, and I'll put that slide up again later, there are a lot of questions about where his company, Brookfield Assets Management, has been investing its money, about its hypocrisy, about its fossil fuels, about its pipelines, and about how it's been paying 5% corporate tax for the last 10 years and sheltering hundreds of millions of dollars in Bermuda. So those are the questions Mark Carney has to answer. Stop distracting people with Pierre Poleyev. No, he's not worked a lot in the private sector. That's not what this is about. This is about you, Mark Carney. And it's not about Pierre Poleyev's security clearance, which once he gets his security clearance, he becomes in the pocket of the Liberal government.
Speaking directly with respect to his refusal, still at a time of great crisis, to get his security clearance, something.
Ramsey with the Toronto Star. Prime Minister, speaking of your cabinet, the front line of your cabinet and the vast majority of your cabinet were all ministers during Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's time. How does this represent change?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is this first thing, smaller cabinet, more focused on action. Everybody in this cabinet is senior. Everybody in this cabinet is senior, so I don't accept the front line and the implication that there's a front line and another line. The second thing is one of the top issues, of course, is the crisis with respect to the United States and the opportunity with respect to trade diversification. I look forward to speaking with President Trump. Just to be clear, we respect the United States.
Now he respects the United States. And he actually corrects a journalist when he says Trump. He says President Trump. Excuse me? Now he respects President Trump. This is all part of the day one persona. This is all part of the day one projection of Mark Carney as a reasonable man, just a little bit to the center of Pierre Poleyev, just a little bit to the left of the Conservative Party, getting rid of those radicals in the cabinet like Guilbeault, taking him out of environment anyway. And no, we don't need Karina Gould in there either. We'll put some unknowns in there too. That's what he's all about on day one. But how about the election?
We respect President Trump. President Trump has put some very important issues at the top of his agenda. I received the questions on a trip to Paris and London in a few days. I received an invitation from the President of France to discuss a variety of issues, both economic, commercial, to reinforce those relationships. Also, issues related to security in Europe, in Canada.
Exactly what I predicted. He's going to be talking about tanking the US dollar when he visits his globalist friends like Emmanuel Macron and Herr Keir Starmer. And he's going to be talking about interfering in Ukraine, how the European Union can replace the US as the primary donor to Ukraine, how Canada can continue to spend billions of dollars throwing money into the black hole of Kiev, and how Canada, along with the European Union, can potentially start a third world war with Russia. That's what Mark Carney is going to be up to in Europe.
Similar discussions will be had with the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. This is sensible. Security is a priority for this government, reinforcing our security, as is diversifying our trading and commercial relationships. Of course, with both Europe and the United Kingdom, there are many opportunities. And as I said a moment ago in my remarks, there are historic ties. With respect to the President, I don't have plans to go to the United States.
Question.
Yeah.
Hi, Prime Minister. Tom Perry with CBC. Can I ask you what your plans are for the next few weeks? Are you going to be bringing back the House? Are you going to be calling an early election? And if so, when should Canadians expect to go to the polls?
Well, they certainly should expect to go to the polls before November. Well,
it's a big joke. Yeah, we'll go to the polls before November. But he might change his mind and make that before what? No, does he mean November 2025 or November 2026? November, that could be this year or next year. Carney's not saying. He's being coy about this election day. Very, very coy. He's been very coy all day as his first day as Prime Minister. And he'll continue to be very coy.
The news today is behind me. An exceptional group of individuals who are serving Canada, united, focused cabinet, focused on action, focused on the issues for Canadians. We are, as I said a moment ago, we will be going to take some decisions which directly meet some of the objectives I set out in my remarks, and we've been discussing.
All right, so he's off to Europe. Scott Moe had an interesting comment to make about that, because did you know we're in a horrible tariff war, not just with the United States, but with China? Yes, we are. Now, this is bad news. Beijing announced retaliatory tariffs on select Canadian farm imports in response to Canadian duties levied back in the fall against Chinese-made electric vehicles to protect our electric vehicle industry, which nobody wants to protect in Canada because we're not buying electric vehicles. Nobody wants them. So to protect our electric vehicles from Chinese imports that nobody wants to buy either, we're putting tariffs on the Chinese imports, and farmers are suffering as a result of retaliatory tariffs from China. China is hitting Canada with 100% tariffs on canola oil and peas, 25% tariffs on pork and aquatic products. Now that's a result of protecting commodity electric vehicles that nobody wants to buy. And Scott Moe points this out. Why are you going to Europe, he says, Mr. Carney, when you need to fight tariffs from the US and China?
I noticed this morning already that his first planned international visit is to the European Union. Not good. Not good. We don't have a trade war with the European Union today. We are in the midst of a trade war with the United States of America and China, the two largest economies in the world and our two largest export markets and trading partners.
No, Mr. Carney, or Prime Minister Carney, wants to go to the EU because that's where he's happiest, talking to his globalist friends. Now, Pierre Poleyev, I really think, is continuing to maintain a good stride. But as I said, I felt sorry for him yesterday because he's going up against an image. He's going up against a projection of Mark Carney. Mark Carney is completely manufactured. He's a manufactured political candidate. He's been so from day one. He's unelected. 150,000 liberals. Some of them were 14 years of age. Some of them weren't even citizens of Canada. Made this man Liberal leader. 2/3 of the Liberal Party membership was disqualified from voting for him. Now let's hear what Pierre Poleyev has to say.
Congratulating Mr. Trudeau's economic advisor, Mark Carney, on becoming Prime Minister only 3 months after he moved his headquarters out of Canada to New York, moving jobs away from Canada. Today, Liberals are trying to trick Canadians into electing them for a 4th term in power, with a cabinet that is 87% the same as Trudeau's cabinet. 100% of today's Liberal cabinet were in Justin Trudeau's Liberal caucus. These same Liberal MPs voted to hike the carbon tax, double the debt, double food bank lineups, and double housing costs. The same Liberals all supported blocking pipelines, LNG plants, and passing the anti-energy law C-69 that has made Canada even more reliant on the U.S.
And of course, while we were blocking pipelines, we were blocking the sale of LNG, liquid natural gas, to Europe. Remember Trudeau said there was no business case for that? Mark Carney was investing in fossil fuels. Mark Carney was investing in pipelines around the world, just not in Canada. So Mark Carney is the sheer globalist. And Poleyev knows that.
Stephen Guilbeault, for example, the radical anti-development activist twice arrested for climbing buildings illegally to block resource projects, a self-described, and I quote, socialist, has been promoted to be the minister responsible for all of Quebec, but also responsible, according to Mr. Carney, for nature. That means nothing will get built anywhere in Canada because he will be standing in the way.
Now, that's a good point, because officially, Guilbeault's ministry is called biodiversity, and I think Poleyev cut it down to what it really is. The Minister of Nature? It sounds harmless, doesn't it? And that's, of course, that's why Carney moved him out of the environment and climate change portfolio. This man is a radical Greenpeace activist who calls himself a socialist, who's a Manchurian candidate, who cozies up to China, goes to China once a year to visit with his Chinese environmental friends. What a joke. China is the greatest polluter in the world, but it's also the greatest country for greenhouse gases, which of course Carney's supposed to be hating so much. He wants net zero. But of course, Guilbeault is a good friend of China, just like Mark Carney is a good friend of China.
Meanwhile, all of Trudeau's Liberal advisors, Gerald Butts and Tom Pitfield, are now top Carney advisors. They were in attendance today, not even hiding that they're still the ones running the show. The same people who ran Justin Trudeau are now running Mark Carney. Carney's chief of staff, his Liberal chief of staff, is a former Trudeau minister forced to resign for many scandals, including lying about moving Paul Bernardo out of a maximum security prison. You see, Mark Carney thinks Canadians are stupid. He thinks that a little bit of cosmetic surgery will allow the Liberals to disguise who they are and make people forget what they did for 10 years in order to elect them to a 4th Liberal term. But it's the same Liberal gang with the same Liberal agenda, the same Liberal results, and the same Liberal promises of the last 10 years. Only they want you to be fooled, and they want to take 4 terms. Carbon tax Carney will try later today to pull another fast one. This one's going to be very sneaky, very sneaky. I call it the carbon tax con job. I told you this was going to happen, by the way. Don't say I didn't warn you. He's going to hide the consumer carbon tax for 60 days. And if he's reelected, he'll bring it back bigger than ever with no rebate. Let's be clear. He says that the carbon tax he intends to bring in after the election will be a, quote, shadow carbon tax. And we know that he loves carbon taxes because he publicly advised Trudeau over the last 5 years to raise the taxes even more. But here's what I've got. This is the Liberal carbon tax law. This law cannot be eliminated unless Parliament resumes to vote it down. Mr. Carney could have asked Trudeau to do that months ago. Mr. Carney could have reconvened Parliament today to vote this law down, but he won't.
Now, this is a very good point, because if you're reading the mainstream media, it's all using words like axing, destroying, nullifying, ending, killing. These are all the words to describe what Carney's supposedly doing to the carbon tax. I only saw one report yesterday use the word pause. He's pausing the carbon tax, and Poleyev recognizes exactly what's going on here. He can come back and raise that carbon tax again because it's still on the books. The carbon tax is still there. He's just reduced how much the carbon tax is. And Poleyev has pointed to this. Unfortunately, Poleyev doesn't talk about the carbon tariff, which I will get to in a minute here.
He will keep the carbon tax law in place, even while he temporarily hides the carbon tax from the gas pump for 60 days leading up to the election. And after that election, if God forbid he were reelected, there would be a bigger carbon tax than ever before, because Carney would no longer need your vote, but he'd still need your money. Canadians know that over 10 years, the Trudeau-Carney Liberals doubled the debt, doubled housing costs, and doubled food bank lineups. They've made us weak facing the Americans. Giving the Liberals a fourth term will not change any of that. If you cannot afford food or a home after 3 terms of Liberals, nothing will change after 4.
Nothing will change after 4. And unfortunately, guys, like I said, Poleyev really needs to read up on this other hidden carbon tax that Mark Carney has been talking about very quietly. And this is another reason he's going to Europe, because Europe is considering the same idea. Here it is.
Third thing we're going to do is to ensure that there's fair competition for our companies and that we penalize high polluting foreign imports. So we're going to develop a carbon border adjustment mechanism. What that does is promote jobs here at home. It prevents carbon leakage abroad. And it aligns Canada with our allies who are still engaged in the fight against climate change.
Okay, folks, that's otherwise known as a carbon tariff. And how is it going to support jobs in Canada? I don't get it. Do you? We're going to punish so-called polluters, meaning people who create greenhouse gas emissions, who create carbon, which Mark Carney insists upon calling pollution, just as Justin Trudeau did. We're going to punish these people with a tariff, a carbon tariff. So why would they want to do business in Canada? Why would they even want to do business? So I think they might just leave Canada and take their business elsewhere, maybe to the United States where there's no carbon tax at all. No consumer carbon tax, no corporate carbon tax, and no carbon tax tariff. Maybe they'll just move to the States. Now, I don't think that's somehow going to help bolster the Canadian economy or help Canadian workers or keep Canadian jobs in this country. It's all an illusion. And I think Poleyev realized what yesterday was all about. It was projecting Mark Carney as a reasonable man, as a rational man, as a moderate politician who does things decisively, who tells you he's going to eliminate the carbon tax when in fact he didn't do that. Even the consumer carbon tax is still on the books. and can be increased at any time that he deems that necessary. And he's certainly not eliminating the corporate carbon tax. He's inventing one. And the carbon tariff, that's Carney's idea too. This is what Mark Carney was up to yesterday. And watch him carefully when he goes to Europe, because it's going to be all about the carbon tariff, Ukraine, and tanking the American dollar, which is something very close to his heart. Now, why aren't the premiers talking about the need for a new election? Well, thankfully, the most reasonable, the most hardworking premier, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, is talking about that, and here she is.
I think that the Prime Minister has made his views very clear about keeping oil and gas in the ground. He's made his views very clear about he not wanting a transparent carbon tax. He wants a hidden one. So I don't think it does Alberta any good if we end up seeing massive increases to industrial carbon taxes. It's been quoted many times saying he thinks that the carbon tax is too low. So I'm going to just reserve judgment. I had a whole range of things that are problematic with the federal government, from emissions caps to tanker bans off the West Coast, the inability to approve pipelines, getting approvals and then having them pulled, having a convoluted regulatory process that makes it impossible to get new pipelines built, continued threats of regulating our power grid, continued threats of regulating our industry, continued threats of export taxes, cutting off energy. I haven't really seen any change that would lead me to be encouraged that we're going to have a reset on our relationship. So we need an election, and that's how it needs to get sorted out.
Yes, we need an election. I'll be back in a minute with some more remarks after this brief message from the store. So please have a look at the store. I think we've got the best merchandise out there. Yeah, I'm a little biased when I say that. I think it's pretty good material. I really enjoy it when I see people buying it. Not because we're making a lot of money off it, because it's nice to be able to share that with you. And please share your photos of of you wearing or using the merchandise with me. Send them. You've got my email address. Send your pictures to me, and I'll show them on the next broadcast or the broadcasts that are coming up. I think we could even make that a permanent part of every broadcast. I think that would be a lot of fun. But what's happening right now with Mark Carney? Pay careful attention. This is another drama show from the Liberal Party that is desperate to stay in power. This is what the Mark Carney thing was all about. They knew they needed to change their image. And really, it is that simple. The Liberals wanted to change their image. Justin Trudeau, manic pop star. People were sick of his insouciance and his narcissism and his games. So they gave you Mark Carney. Much more reasonable man. Much more moderate man. The terrible thing is he's actually more dangerous than Justin Trudeau. He wants to go farther with net zero. He wants to go farther with the carbon tax, as Danielle Smith just said. He wants to destroy the US dollar. He wants a trade war with the United States. He's not moderate, he's not reasonable, and he's not entirely rational. But that is what Mark Carney is up to. And I can tell you, we need to keep an eye on this guy. And we need to continue to expose his relationship to the globalists, his relationship to China, and his hatred of democracy. And I still predict, though, he's going to go for an earlier than later election, because the longer he stays around, the more obvious it is that he has no bloody right to be Prime Minister of Canada and should not be elected in his own right for that job. And that's where we are today. We'll be back again tomorrow with more of the news you need to know. And let's continue to resolve to resist, because Canada's worth it. And our freedom is always worth it.